The pass is still, sir, narrowed now by centuries of silt deposit that have pushed the coastline outward and widened the plain. But still, sir, still recognizable as the specific geographic feature that made it, for 3 days in August of 480 BCE, the most consequential piece of terrain in the ancient world. A narrow gap between the cliffs of Mount Kalydromos and the shore of the Malian Gulf on the eastern coast of central Greece, at its tightest point in the ancient period, perhaps 15 meters wide, perhaps less, a gap so narrow that the largest army ever assembled in the ancient world could not bring its numbers to bear against the force that held the ground and refused to yield it. The 300 Spartans who held that pass are among the most famous soldiers in history. The story has been told so many times and in so many forms that the telling has accumulated layers of mythology in the cinematic invention that now sit between the modern audience and the historical event-like sediment between the surface and the original ground. The 300 leather-clad warriors of popular culture, fighting shirtless against monsters and the giants in a stylized visual landscape that bears no more relationship to historical Sparta or historical Persia, have displaced the historical soldiers to the point where man people who know the name Thermopylae have never encountered the actual history. The actual history is more interesting than the myth, more complicated, more morally ambiguous, and in the specific ways that matter most, more genuinely remarkable. Because the 300 Spartans who went to Thermopylae in August 480 BCE knew they were going to die, not as a possibility, as a certainty. And the question that the actual history poses, the question that the myth answers to simply, is why they went anyway, what they believed their deaths would accomplish, and whether those deaths accomplished what they believed. This is what really happened at Thermopylae. To understand Thermopylae, you have to begin with Persia, and with the specific nature of the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE, because the Persian invasion of Greece was not simply a large army attacking a smaller one. It was a confrontation between the largest political and military organism that the ancient world had yet produced and a collection of small, fractious, frequently quarreling city-states that had never in their history agreed on anything for long enough to constitute a coherent political unit. The Achaemenid Persian Empire in 480 BCE was the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. It stretched from the Aegean coast to modern Turkey in the west to the Indus River in the east, from the Black Sea in the north to the Nile Delta in the south. It encompassed dozens of distinct peoples, languages, and cultures, administered through a sophisticated system of satrapies whose governors reported to the great king and whose populations paid tribute in goods, money, and military service. Its population has been estimated in the tens of millions. Its army, when fully mobilized, could draw on military forces from across this enormous territory, infantry and cavalry and naval units from Persians, Medes, Lydians, Egyptians, Babylonians, Indians, and dozens of other subject peoples. The great king who launched the invasion of Greece was Xerxes, son of Darius, who had been king since 486 BCE, and who inherited both his father's ambition to avenge the Persian defeat at Marathon in 490 BCE and his father's project of bringing the Greek city-states under Persian suzerainty. The Persians had been humiliated at Marathon, where an Athenian force had defeated a Persian expeditionary army on the plain north of Athens in circumstances that the Persians, and Darius personally, had found intolerable. The punishment of Athens for its resistance and its defeat of Persian forces had been unfinished business since Marathon, and Xerxes inherited both the obligation to complete it and the resources if the empire's full military power with which to do so. The Persian force that Xerxes assembled for the Greek campaign of 480 BCE was the largest military expedition in the ancient world's history. The ancient sources, primarily Herodotus, give figures that modern historians have largely dismissed as massively exaggerated. The famous claim of over 5 million soldiers in the Persian force being impossible to sustain given the logistical constraints of ancient warfare. Modern estimates of the Persian force range from approximately 100,000 to 300,000 fighting men, a range itself reflecting genuine scholarly uncertainty, supplemented by a naval force of perhaps 601,2 warships. By any estimate, it was an enormous force, orders of magnitude larger than anything the Greek city-states could individually field and significantly larger than anything they could collectively field even in the unlikely event of full cooperation. The Greek response to the Persian invasion was shaped by a political reality that modern accounts often simplify or romanticize. The Greeks were not united in opposition to Persia. A significant number of Greek city-states, the Greeks who had submitted to Persian demands for earth and water as tokens of submission, were medicing, accommodating themselves to Persian power. Sicily, Boeotia, Argos, and the other significant states either submitted in advance or maintained a carefully neutral position that amounted to accommodation. The Greek resistance that has come down through history as the heroic defense of freedom and the civilization against despotism was mounted by a coalition of approximately 30 Greek city-states out of the hundreds that existed. And even within that coalition, the commitment to resistance was uneven, contested, and in several cases reversed when the strategic situation deteriorated. The Spartan role in the Greek resistance was central and complex. Sparta was the dominant land power of the Greek world in 480 BCE, its army considered the finest fighting force in Greece by general consensus. Its warriors trained from childhood in a system of collective military education, the agoge, that produced soldiers of documented effectiveness. But Sparta had its own institutional constraints on military action. The Spartiate warrior class, whose military excellence was the basis of Spartan power, was a small minority of the total population of Lacedaemon, outnumbered by the Helot population of enslaved agricultural workers whose labor supported the Spartan military system and whose periodic revolts were the Spartan state's most persistent security concern. Sending large Spartan forces out of the Peloponnese for extended periods meant leaving the Helot population inadequately supervised. Aristot the Spartan Epors, the annually elected senior magistrates who constrained the king's authority, weighed seriously in every strategic decision. The decision to send Leonidas and his force to Thermopylae in August 480 BCE was therefore not a simple act of heroic self-sacrifice that the myth presents. It was a strategic decision made within a specific set of political and institutional constraints that shaped both its composition and its objective. Leonidas was one of the two Spartan kings, and his selection for the command was appropriate to his status. The composition of his force, 300 Spartiate warriors who were all fathers of living sons, has been analyzed as a specific selection criterion designed to ensure that the Spartan lineage lines would continue regardless of the outcome of the mission. A criterion that implies the mission's lethal outcome was anticipated. The 300 Spartans were not alone at Thermopylae. The Greek coalition force that assembled at the pass numbered approximately 7,000 men, including contingents from Thespiae, Thebes, Arcadia, Phocis, Locris, Corinth, and the other states. The Thespians, whose own city lay directly in the path of the Persian advance and who had rejected the option of accommodation, contributed approximately 700 men. The Sabans, whose city would subsequently submit to Persia, contributed 400 men. Though the genuineness of their commitment to the Greek cause was suspected by Leonidas and the subsequent events would confirm that suspicion, the Phocians contributed 1,000 men who were positioned on the mountain path that bypassed the main pass, the Untold path, whose existence was the specific tactical vulnerability that ultimately decided the battle. The pass at Thermopylae had been used as a defensive position before. Its specific geography, the narrow gap between the mountain and the sea, neutralized the numerical advantage of any attacking force by reducing the frontage on which they could deploy. In the 5th century BCE, the coastline was significantly closer to the cliffs than it is today, and the navigable width of the pass at its narrowest point, the Middle Gate, where the Phocians had previously constructed a defensive wall, was narrow enough that a force of 7,000 could hold it against man times their number if they maintained discipline and continued the fight. The Persian army reached the Malian Gulf and the approaches to Thermopylae in mid-August 480 BCE. Xerxes, by the account of Herodotus, waited 4 days before ordering an assault, sending a cavalry scout to assess the Greek defenses and reportedly being told by the exiled Spartan king Demaratus, who accompanied the Persian expedition as an advisor, that the Spartans at the pass were preparing themselves for battle and they were not planning to flee. The specific report of the cavalry scout, that the Spartans visible from outside the pass were exercising and combing their hair, has been analyzed as evidence of the Spartan pre-battle ritual that Herodotus describes, the warriors' specific attention to their appearance before combat as an expression of the Spartan warrior code that prepared the body for its best performance at the moment of its potential last act. The first Persian assault on Thermopylae came on the 5th day after the Persian army's arrival, when Xerxes ordered Median and Lycian troops into the pass to take the position. The assault was repulsed. The second Persian assault, by the immortals, the elite royal bodyguard whose title derived from the institutional practice of immediately replacing any casualty to maintain a constant force of 10,000, was also repulsed with significant casualties. The fighting in the pass was of the specific close-range infantry kind in which the Persian numerical advantage was entirely neutralized by the geography. The Greeks fought with longer spears, heavier bronze shields, and the superior armor compared to the lighter-equipped Persian infantry, and the narrow pass prevented the Persians from flanking or enveloping the Greek formation. The phalanx, the Greek infantry formation of overlapping shields and the extended spears, was at its most effective in precisely the kind of restricted terrain that Thermopylae provided. The tactics of the 300 and the allied Greek forces during the first 2 days of fighting have been reconstructed from the ancient accounts with reasonable confidence. The Greek forces rotated their frontline units, allowing tired formations to withdraw and the fresh formations to advance, a practice that extended their effective fighting capacity over the extended engagements. The Spartans specifically used a feigned retreat tactic on at least one occasion, withdrawing from the pass in apparent disorder to draw pursuing Persian troops into a more exposed position and then turning to destroy them when the Persians had broken their own formation in the pursuit. The tactic was effective and the losses inflicted on the Persian force during the 2 days of unsuccessful assault were significant by any ancient standard. The death of Thermopylae was not military, it was geographical. On the second night of the battle, a Greek man named Ephialtes of Malis approached the Persian command and offered to guide a force along the Untold path, the mountain track that bypassed the Mayan pass and emerged behind the Greek position. The immortals were dispatched along the path that night under hydrants, guided by Ephialtes. The Phocian force that Leonidas had positioned on the path to guard against exactly this eventuality heard the approaching Persian force in the early morning darkness and retreated to the higher ground, either from panic or from a tactical decision that the modern sources do not clarify. The path was open. Leonidas learned of the Persian flanking movement before dawn on the third day, from his own scouts and from the professor Megistias, who by the ancient account divined the coming disaster from omens during the night and warned Leonidas of what the morning would bring. The Greek commanders assembled at dawn and debated what to do. Most of the allied contingents withdrew. The specific decision-making process of this council is not recoverable from the ancient sources with precision, but the outcome was clear. Leonidas dismissed the majority of the Greek force, retaining the 300 Spartans and the 700 Thespians who refused to leave, and reportedly the 400 Sabines who Leonidas retained as hostages against the city's subsequent behavior. Why Leonidas stayed is the question that has generated more analysis and more mythology than any other aspect of the battle. The most straightforward ancient explanation, given by Herodotus, is that the oracle at Delphi had told the Spartans that either Sparta would be destroyed or a Spartan king would die. Indeed, that Leonidas understood his role as sacrificial. His death necessary to fulfill the oracle and thereby protect Sparta. The oracle's words, as Herodotus gives them, are among the most famous in ancient literature. The prediction that the strength of bulls or lions would not resist the Mede, that Sparta would be destroyed or mourn a king of Heracles' line, the specific prophecy that Leonidas carried the Thermopylae as his personal death warrant. The oracle explanation is historical in the sense that it is what Herodotus reports and what ancient Spartans appear to have believed. It is not entirely satisfying as the complete explanation for a decision of this complexity. The strategic argument for Leonidas' stand is also real and has been made by military historians since antiquity. The Persian army needed to move south through Thermopylae to advance into central Greece. Every day that the pass was held was a day gained for the Greek fleet under Themistocles at Artemisium, which was simultaneously fighting a series of naval engagements against the Persian fleet in the waters of the northern tip of Euboea. The land and the sea battles were strategically linked. The land defense making the sea defense possible by preventing the Persian army from bypassing the naval engagement by marching around it. Leonidas' final stand was not merely symbolic sacrifice. It was the conclusion of a strategic defense that had bought time and inflicted casualties across 2 days of fighting. The final day at Thermopylae, the third day of the battle, is the day that history remembers most vividly and that the ancient sources describe with the most dramatic intensity. Leonidas led his force out of the narrow pass and into the wider ground where the pass opened, abandoning the defensive advantage of the narrowest position, and instead fighting in a wider area where the larger Spartan force could at least use their weapons to maximum effect before being overwhelmed. The fighting was desperate and continuous as the Persian forces that had come through the Anopaya path began to close on the Greek position from behind while the main Persian force pressed from the front. Leonidas was killed in the fighting, and the account of what happened to his body in the immediate aftermath and in the subsequent Persian reaction is one of the most revealing details of the entire engagement. The Greek forces, Spartan and Thespian, fought over the body and recovered it from the Persians multiple times before being driven back to a small hill at the back of the wider area. Xerxes, by Herodotus' account, was so enraged by the losses that Leonidas and his small force had inflicted on the Persian army over 3 days that he ordered Leonidas' head cut off and placed on a stake, a specific desecration that violated the Persian custom of honoring fallen enemies, and that the ancient sources identify as a mark of how deeply Leonidas had gotten under the great king's skin. The impalement of a fallen enemy's head was, by the conventions of ancient warfare, an expression of extreme dishonor reserved for those who had made themselves particularly hateful to their killers. That Xerxes violated his own culture's norms of respect for a fallen warrior's body says something about what the 3 days at Thermopylae had cost him. The aftermath of Thermopylae unfolded immediately and on multiple timescales simultaneously. In the days following the battle, the Persian army advanced into central Greece, burning Athens, whose population had been evacuated in advance of the Persian arrival, and occupying the city. The Athenian evacuation, organized by Themistocles in compliance with the Delphic oracle's instruction to trust in wooden walls, is one of the most extraordinary civil mobilizations in ancient history. The entire population of the largest Greek city transported by sea to the Saronic Gulf and to the Peloponnese before the Persians arrived. The decisive naval engagement came at Salamis in late September 480 BCE, when the Athenian and the allied Greek fleet under Themistocles, by a combination of strategic deception and tactical positioning, cut a larger Persian fleet in the narrow waters between the island of Salamis and the Attic coast and destroyed it as an effective fighting force in a single day of battle. Xerxes watched from a throne on the shore as his fleet was demolished. The specific tactical situation at Salamis, a larger force caught in restricted waters where its numerical advantage was neutralized, was not entirely unlike the situation at Thermopylae. Indeed, the connection between the two battles is not merely chronological. The land war continued into 479 BCE with the Persian force that had wintered in Greece under the commander Mardonius. The decisive land engagement came at Plataea in the summer of 479, where the full Greek coalition under Spartan command defeated the Persian army in a battle whose outcome finally removed the Persian presence from the Greek mainland. The Greek victory at Plataea was not as clean or as dramatic as the narrative of subsequent centuries made it appear. The battle involving significant confusion, unexpected retreats, and near disasters on the Greek side before the Spartan force managed to turn and destroy the Persian infantry that pursued them. But the outcome was unambiguous. Mardonius was killed and the Persian army disintegrated. The significance of Thermopylae in the larger sequence of events is real and documented, even if the way it has been transmitted and mythologized distorts the specific nature of that significance. The 3 days at the pest did not save Greece. The pest fell, the Persians advanced, Athens burned. What the 3 days accomplished was to inflict casualties on the Persian force, to buy time for the Greek fleet, to demonstrate to the Greek coalition that Persian forces could be killed in quantity by Greek infantry when the terrain was favorable, and to provide a specific act of organized self-sacrifice by the Spartans that functioned as a political and psychological statement of Spartan commitment to the resistance at a moment when many Greeks were still calculating the possibility of accommodation. The political significance of Leonidas' death is visible in Spartan behavior in the years after Thermopylae. Sparta did not withdraw from the Greek coalition. It did not accommodate Persian power. It committed its full military resources to the battles at Plataea and in subsequent decades to the Delian League's continuing campaign against Persian power in the Aegean. The oracle had said Sparta would mourn a king of Heracles' line. Sparta mourned, and then Sparta fought. The monument at Thermopylae has been referred to and 500 years in various forms. The modern monument, a bronze statue of Leonidas standing above the inscribed epitaph that Simonides composed for the Spartan dead, stands at the site where the pest was and where the silt has filled in and where the landscape no more longer looks like what it was in 480 BCE. The epitaph is among the most famous in history, 6 words in ancient Greek that translate with perfect precision into a statement that has no more equivalent in any other language, because what it expresses is specific to the people who lived and died in the wake that Sparta lived and died. Go, tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Not that they died heroically, not that they fought bravely, that they obeyed their laws, that the specific obligation of Spartan citizenship, the requirement to stand and fight and did not retreat because Spartan law did not permit retreat, was fulfilled in the most complete way possible. The laws required it. They obeyed. That is the entire moral architecture of Thermopylae in 6 words, and it has been said in that form since Leonidas inscribed it on the original monument. And it will be said in that form as long as anyone is left who can read ancient Greek or any of the 1,000 languages it has been translated into. The pass is narrower now than it was. The sea is further, the mountain is unchanged, and somewhere in the ground beneath the silt that 2,500 years of deposition have laid down. There is the specifics that the Spartans stood on and the Persians crossed and the Spartans died on and the Ephialtes walked over to find the path that under the 3 days and began the 2,500 years of everything that came after. The earth does not remember names. It received everyone equally, the Spartans and the Persians and the Spartans. And the one traitor whose name has come down through history as the Greek word for traitor and nothing else. The mountain held the path and the path was walked and the path fell and the world continued in the direction it continued and is continuing still. Carrying the weight of 3 days in August in 480 BC in the specific way that the world carries the weight of all of its unrepeatable moments, which is to say invisibly, and completely, and forever.